Mark Scott, let us begin with an assumption, and that assumption is that the ABC was right to go and to try and investigate the story of the burned hands of the asylum seekers. But let's get down to the nub of the question. Was that footage, was that story correctly reported?
Well, Mark, the Australian media had widely reported these allegations some weeks before. The ABC then went and did further investigation. There's great uncertainty as to what has happened on board that boat and what has given rise to these claims. The ABC did further investigation, came into possession of that videotape, and then further reported that.
And I'm asking about the handling of that. Was it correctly handled?
Well, people will come to judgments on that, Mark, and as many journalists as there are out there and former editors there are out there, you'll have different judgments. I suppose what I'm saying to you is I think it was an important story to report, the right story to report, the result of investigations by the ABC, and what's very important in this context is that it's clear that the ABC was not judge and jury on that matter. The ABC did not say that these allegations had been proved. The ABC said that they were important allegations.
Sure,
and we went pursuing the truth.
The ABC used the phrase that the footage appears to back the allegations.
Yeah. Well,
should it have used that phrase?
Well, some people can second guess the semantics, Mark. I think what I'm saying is that the allegations had been raised, had been reported everywhere. Then the videotape came to light, and that videotape, along with the claims of the asylum seekers, again sent that story forward. And what the ABC didn't do was say that this was conclusive evidence at all. We said
but
it
if we
clearly
say that it
demonstrates
appears to back the allegations, aren't we putting some weight behind the asylum seekers and to some degree prejudging the issue?
No, I don't think we did prejudge it, Mark. I think the allegations had been widely reported all across the Australian media. Then the videotape came to light. And clearly that videotape coming to light led to further questions, further allegations, further questions about what had happened on those boats. And what the ABC has been doing is pursuing that story. We've continued to pursue it. We've never said that we know the answer to it. We've said that they are serious allegations. What takes place under the Australian flag on the high seas is clearly a matter of public importance, and it clearly has been important for us to continue to investigate this story. And part of my frustration, I must say, is that there are some out there in other media outlets who seem to be suggesting by the fact that the ABC has raised these very important allegations and brought the evidence that some people have presented to us and put that in the public domain, that we are somehow saying that's the end of the story. We've been saying it's the beginning of the story.
But you know from watching events at the BBC over the Iraq War, the weapons of mass destruction case which led to the Hutton report, you would know that a phrase or a couple of phrases can come close to bringing down a massive organisation like the BBC or the ABC. So that's why I'm asking you about the phrasing.
Yeah, and Mark, I'm saying that people will come to a judgment on that themselves. I'm saying that I believe it was an important story, and the way that that story has been depicted in other media outlets is not fair and is not correct.
Are you backing the editorial chain which resulted in it going to air in the form that it did?
Well, I'm saying, Mark, that I think it was an important story. I'm saying that I am convinced that that story on its merits needed to be broadcast, and I'm standing by that story. Now, inevitably on stories, and you're an experienced journalist, as am I, you can look back on some things and think, would you do them differently? I'm not saying that's the case in this point, but people will have their views. The question has been, was this an important story? And I'm saying, yes, it was.
Something's just fallen out off a light there. I'll just take a pause. Arguing on behalf of the ABC getting the Australian network, you talked about the ABC as an arm of Australia's soft diplomacy. By doing that, didn't you open the organisation up to exactly the kind of claims of lack of patriotism that it's been facing during the last couple of weeks?
I think it's a very narrow definition of patriotism and of soft diplomacy, if people think that's the case. We've always said that we'd operate under the ABC Charter and the ABC's editorial standards. The example that we show in the region is of being a fair, balanced, independent public broadcaster. That's one of the things that the ABC and Australian Networks demonstrates in the region. That's one of the that's one of the most powerful examples that we give. And so that's why we don't think there was a contradiction at all of the ABC playing that role, just as the BBC has played that role over many years. And if you look around the world, Mark, the organisations that deliver international broadcasting on behalf of governments are invariably public broadcasters.
But I don't believe that the BBC describes itself as an organ of soft diplomacy.
But the BBC is arguably the strongest organ of soft diplomacy that the UK has, because what they do is they demonstrate the values of the independent public broadcaster into a world where there is often not values of free and independent journalism. So we don't see a contradiction in that way. We've run Australian Network now for more than a decade. We've run Radio Australia now for 7 decades. And one of the things that we put on display is a robust democracy, a free press and an independent public broadcaster.
Well, Paul Sheehan in the Sydney Morning Herald today and other sources have said that the ABC is almost certain to lose the contract for the Australian Network. The Australian Network may be abolished in the May budget. Is that your understanding?
Well, that hasn't been communicated to me, Mark. In fact, we've signed a 10-year contract with the government to deliver Australian Network. And
if it happened, how much of a blow would it be?
Well, I think it would be a blow, but the question we have to face is, would it be a blow to Australia? If you look at G20 countries, Mark, about 16 of them are significantly investing in international broadcasting. 16 of them are, I think 15 of them actually, are spending more than Australia spends, significantly more. A lot of that focus is in the region, and we've been reinventing this network in the last 18 months. We have a series of partners with media organisations in India and China and Indonesia, putting far more digital content up on air. We have new programs about business and education and tourism and agriculture, and these are all important displays of modern contemporary Australia. I must say, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about Australian Network. I think expats would want more news and more football. I think sometimes people travelling into the region want to see more from home. But really, some of our most popular programs are programs that help people learn English, help people see children's programming.
Australian Network's operations overlap with domestic ABC operations. If they took it away, how much would it hurt the ABC budget?
Yeah, well, it would take some millions out of our budget, particularly around news. It would affect the extent to which we can resource some of our foreign bureaus. So it would not be an insignificant cut. But I think the broader question is, like other governments around the world, is the government willing to continue to invest in broadcasting and digital media as an important arm of soft diplomacy? Nearly every G20 country is making this investment. Is Australia not going to make that investment?
Joe Hockey said today that he's rung you a couple of times to complain about what he sees as bias in ABC programs. How often does that happen?
Well, it happens from time to time, Mark, and it happens from both sides of politics. In fact, the politician I think who's been most outspoken to me in person around criticism of the ABC performance was Bob Brown, the former leader of the Greens. The bottom line is, if you look at our performance over the last 80 years, politicians from both sides have been critical of the ABC. Part of our job is to do stories that politicians themselves may not want to go to air.
One of your predecessors told me at his leaving party that he'd had a call from a politician after I'd done an interview with that politician, a minister actually, calling for my sacking. How often does that happen?
You don't get mentioned too often in dispatches.
No,
Mike.
Not about me, about
well, I think
people.
I think some journalists, some programs, some stories from time to time get politicians upset. But this is part of the...
So you do get calls asking for you to punish, sanction, sack people?
No, I wouldn't want to overstate that. I think it's more in terms of frustration from time to time. And look, Mark, if there's a problem with our broadcasts, if in fact we haven't held up to our editorial standards, if in fact we've had some breach or some failure, then we need to admit up to that, and if there are problems, we need to address that. But what I'd say is that by and large, we have some times of the day there are 65 live microphones broadcasting ABC content, tens of thousands of hours of content that goes out every year. We're not perfect. We've never said we are perfect, but our test is not, are politicians happy with our content? Some of the stories they're most unhappy about are some of the most important stories that we need to do.
How do you respond to what Ray Hadley said to Tony Abbott on the radio, where he said that he and Alan Jones are subject to enormous scrutiny and the ABC can get away with what it likes unscrutinised?
Well, with the greatest respect to Ray, demonstrably untrue. The ABC has the biggest unit internally reviewing our editorial quality.
Internally, that's what they always complain about, though.
Well, internally, Mark, is the first step of it. So an independent unit, independent from working with you or here in the news division or in television, reviewing audience complaints. And then if audience members are unhappy with that, they can go to the ACMA, the same group that reviews Ray Hadley and Alan Jones. So it's a very similar kind of process that exists, but we have far more rigour. And I can tell you that an ABC journalist gets more advice around editorial standards, our editorial guidelines, has a far higher bar of expectation than exists anywhere else in the commercial media, and that's the way it should be. We should have higher standards because we are the public broadcaster.
Now, Paul Sheehan in the Sydney Morning Herald today says that the ABC and the SBS should be preparing for a merger because one's on the drawing board. Malcolm Turnbull told me on this program last week that he didn't favour that. Who do you believe?
Well, I've had no advice that a merger is being planned between the ABC and SBS. I mean, as part of this back office review, this efficiency review that we're having, I think invariably the question will be asked, can the public broadcasters work more closely together? There are some facilities or resources that we should share. We're building a new building in Melbourne in advanced planning now because our previous building there in parts of suburban Melbourne is falling apart. We would welcome SBS coming in and being part of that, and we've made that offer to them. So there might be opportunities to work together, but I think the Minister is pretty clear in his view that he doesn't envisage a merger.
Now, you've been subject, and the organisation has been subject, not just in this last couple of weeks over the asylum seeker issue, but really since the Snowden question, the story about the Indonesian president being bugged, to an absolute barrage of criticism. I can't remember, even in 40 years when I remember a lot of attacks on the ABC, I can't remember it being so sustained.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Well, I think part of that attack has come from News Corporation. If you look at News Corporation's history over the almost the entire length of the ABC's operation, News Corporation has a strong philosophical opposition to public broadcasting, and that's been consistent in the Murdoch family through the generations. And I think they have a commercial opposition to us as well. I think they think that they would have larger audiences and be able to make more money if we weren't there, even though clearly we don't take any money away from them. And I think as in a sense newspapers get a little bit weaker, there's a fight for a strong presence in news online, and I think News Corporation would want that to be out of the way as well. So I think part of those assaults are ideological, some of those assaults are commercial, but as they make those assaults, I appreciate that on occasions the ABC is not perfect and we should be open and robust to fair-minded criticism. But I think, Mark, it's very important we don't just focus on the 2% of content that this all seems to be about. We are a big, broad public broadcaster, very strong in regional and rural Australia.
So you reject these allegations that it's a self-perpetuating oligarchy, that it's a inner west in Melbourne, Sydney terms, that it's a sort of latte sipping...
It's just a ridiculous proposition. You go to regional and rural Australia... You know, as I do quite regularly, we're the lifeblood of those communities. The level of support and the level of engagement we have in regional and rural Australia is remarkable. You look at the kind of content that we put out that are loved, it's loved by our audiences, our children's content, the high quality drama that we put to air, our services to classical music, our services through Triple J. This is just, we are a remarkable broadcaster in our reach and impact to Australians everywhere. And that's why the research shows, Mark, news poll research, that 85% of Australians believe we provide a valuable or very valuable service, and over 70% of Australians use our services every week. So
a Fairfax poll that I saw yesterday showed more than 50% of people still think that the ABC is neutral, but of the others, there was 30-something that considered that it was biased to the ALP. What's going on there?
Well, Mark, I think that's partly a reflection of all the noise that's been going around in recent weeks and this campaign that's existed on commercial radio and campaign that's existed through some of the newspapers newspapers. But by and large, Mark, all our research shows, and this is the Newspoll research we do annually, is that we are the most trusted media organisation in the country. We're viewed as the fairest media organisation in the country, and we operate overwhelmingly with great public support.